And Liberal MP from Melbourne, Katie Allen, joins us. Thanks for joining us, Katie. First up, I want to find out your thoughts about climate policy. Suddenly, because Joe Biden is going to be President of the United States and he's going to take the US back into Paris, we've got a lot of people on the left saying Australia should now follow the US. We should always follow US policy and apparently do more on climate, even though we're already in Paris.
Well, I think that's the very point, Chris, isn't it? Is that the US is now following us. Well, if they do decide to do what we're hearing, which is in the next 77 days to rejoin Paris. We've been in Paris, we've stayed in Paris, we're committed to Paris and we're delivering on Paris. So I think we should be holding our heads up very proudly. And I would really welcome the Minister for Energy and Emissions Reduction, Angus Taylor's new low emissions technology statement, which may have been a little bit lost because we've all been a bit focused on COVID, but it's very exciting. It's got a climate change authority that's going to be led by Alan Finkel, the current Chief Scientist of Australia, who's stepping down at the end of this year. It's got a lot of really great targets within it, which is about enabling new technology. So making sure that we can get hydrogen under $2, that we've got good soil carbon measures, that we're looking at carbon capture and storage and use, and also that we're looking at batteries and other forms of new technology, including hydrogen. So it's a very exciting time for Australian action on climate, and I think we welcome as a government the Biden commitment, if it does go ahead and recommit with President Biden-elect with the plans going forward. So I think we're feeling very positive about all of this.
But as you say, Australia has a very pragmatic, technology-focused approach on energy and climate. If Joe Biden comes in with a big Green New Deal, won't that tend to undercut our arguments? Up until now, we've been in sync, really, with America because Donald Trump was also focused on technology and efficient economic alternatives.
Well, I've been looking at Joe Biden's policies, and in fact he's in step with ours that technology is what we need to invest in. He's particularly looking at his policies online, very interested in carbon capture, use and storage. He actually is talking about the role of nuclear in the US. And I think it's very important that Australia continues to have a conversation as a society about what technologies we want to get us to where we need to get to. We've got, as a government, we've got a very committed plan. We are very carefully signed up to all the appropriate international obligations, and we're about a very practical, strong conversation with the community, taking Australians with us on this important journey, which is about bringing everyone together to have a cleaner, greener future. And so I'm feeling very positive about the new technologies that are going to help us to get there.
Now, as a Melburnian, you must be filled so relieved. You know, the Ring of Steel is gone. People are getting back to something towards normal. I've spoken to a lot of my family and friends in Melbourne. Of course, it's been a really tough time. And of course, they celebrate the fact that they've got the infections down to zero over the last week. But my query here is, we all know that, of course, the Daniel Andrews government played a role in quarantine and allowing this to get out of hand. But the point about the lockdown is, was it necessary? Surely Victoria could have got on top of this without such extreme measures. We had things like curfews, which all the scientists told us were just a waste of time.
Look, there is absolutely a commitment to Plan A, B and then C. Plan A was, strong quarantining, which the federal government was very clear about, and that failed in Victoria. Plan B was strong contact tracing every case, every day. That failed in Victoria. So we had to, unfortunately, move to Plan C, which was lockdown, and Victorians, supported that lockdown in a majority, which is great, because at the end of the day, the lockdown was what got control of it. It was a pity that we had to pass through Plan A, B and C, Plan A and B to get to Plan C. Now, I understand that quarantining is being addressed, through an inquiry. We're working out what went wrong in Victoria. We've now got an inquiry looking at contact tracing. Let's hope the Victorian government takes those lessons on board. We know that Alan Finkel, the Chief Scientist of Australia, has already been looking at the Victorian system. He's now travelling around Australia and looking at quarantining and sharing of data and knowledge between the states and territories, because we want to be a united country. We want best practice across all of the states and territories, because this thing ain't going to go away very quickly. We need to make sure we know how to live with this. And going forward, it's great to be able to celebrate zero cases, I think, for 10 days in Victoria.
You can't lock down again. It ain't going away. No. You can't lock down again. You can't put Victoria through that again. It's unsustainable. I need to move on to something else, though, Katie, and we're expecting the ABC to drop a big sex scandal story tonight, focusing on your side of politics, on the coalition. Of course, Prime Minister Malcolm Turnbull, when he was in office, introduced a bonk ban, no sexual relations between ministers, MPs and their staff. Was that the right move? And is there a sense of dread about what's going to be revealed tonight?
Well, look, I'm a new Member of Parliament and I'm used to working in a professional workplace, and I expect that to continue here in the House of Parliament, and that it's a professional workplace and we all need to be professional about our relationships. And where there is a workplace power imbalance, it's very important that there's a separation of those sorts of activities. So, you know, I think people like to hear about these sorts of things because there's, you know, gossip is something that travels very quickly, but I'm very respectful of the sorts of behaviours that I'm seeing here in this 46th Parliament, and I'm hopeful that we're going to continue to see high standards. It's very important that high standards is what is expected by the public, and we should be all held to those high standards as an accountable outcome, I think, for all Australians.
Indeed, we haven't seen the details of the allegations yet, but here's what Prime Minister Scott Morrison said about it today in anticipation.
We would just expect of the ABC always that they would act in an independent and an unbiased, apartisan way. And if they're going to make inquiries, that I would think that they'd want to do them across the political spectrum. And it's really for the ABC under their charter to remain true to that. And it's always important that the ABC remains true to their charter, and I would expect them to do that.
It's a fair point, isn't it, Katie Allen? We know that if there are these sorts of things going on, they happen across all parties. I don't know why they'd focus entirely on the coalition. I remember a little bit of ancient history, but of course when Gareth Evans was having an affair with the then Democrat Cheryl Kernot and she switched to the Labor Party, the whole press gallery knew about it and chose not to report it.
Well, I think that there is sometimes a concept. When I was a medical research professor, people would talk about, you know, what goes on in international conferences, and that's no longer, you know, something that's acceptable type of behaviour. I think, you know, consenting adults is one thing, but when there's a power imbalance, you have to be very, very careful. And so, you know, I expect the highest possible standards of personal behaviour. I think everybody does. I think Australians believe that. And unfortunately, gossip does go around the circles very easily, but it is important to understand that people's personal life is one thing. I think if they're doing the wrong thing, that's another thing. But, you know, we want to make sure that we're not just being gossipy about relationships, that there is something that people are concerned about. Well, that's a different matter. But I think, you know, there's always a bit of a fine line between someone's personal life and when there's a power imbalance.
Thanks so much for joining us, Katie. I appreciate it.
Thanks very much, Chris.